Hi everyone, today I'm going to share what I thought about the book The Brothers by Kinzer, which was assigned to me for the project. This book goes deep into the lives of the brothers John Foster and Alan Dulles, two brothers who had some of the most powerful positions in the United States during the Cold War. John Foster was the Secretary of State for the U.S., and his brother Alan was the Director of the CIA. So as you can imagine, those are very high positions to hold in government, especially during the Cold War. And together, they shaped how America's foreign policy dealt in ways that we still deal with today, which is very cool. What makes this story so fascinating to me is how much it connects with their events throughout the Cold War with some of the bigger events that we have today. So the first topic I'd like to go into: who were the Dulles brothers? The Dulles brothers, they were born into a privilege where they were raised with strong belief of American exceptionalism. Now, what is that? That kind of means like just being perfect at being the best American. Their grandfather, John Foster, was a Secretary of State, and their uncle, Robert Lansing, also held that position as well. The family background had instilled them the idea that America was on this divine idea that they had to get rid of communism throughout the world, and they were so deeply influenced by this. It was called Calvinism, and Calvinism is where you kind of like divide the world into good and evil, good versus bad, man versus I don't know what I'm trying to explain, but the black and white worldview point of this was the foundation of some of their policies. Now, Foster, the older brother, was the public, he was like the public face of everything. He was the leader. But his younger brother, Alan, on the other hand, he was charming, secretive, looked good. He was the ultimate spy guy. And together, that's why they were so powerful, because you had one guy that could lead and the other guy that could go behind the scenes. A quote for this that would kind of like ties in with their Calvinism and the free world idea that I found in chapter 2 at the beginning was, for us, there are two kinds of people in this world. Those are Christians and those who support the free enterprise, and others. For my topic 2, I wanted to talk about their vision for America and what they thought. And one of the main ideas that I took, from this book as I was reading it was how to them, the world was a battlefield during the Cold War. And the United States, they had to win at all costs. They could not lose the Cold War. They saw communism as not just a terrible political ideology, but it's an existence to our freedom and democracy we have in our country. And that belief led them to be so aggressive on foreign policy that they had to rely on covert operations and throwing coups in different countries and just trying to shift the economic influence around the world to shift in America's favor. And they believed that countries couldn't be neutral on this. You were either with the U.S. or you were with the Soviets. And that was a scary time we lived in the Cold War. And this was this approach, it ignored the complexities that other nations have throughout the world, and especially third world nations. A quote from this that also helps is in chapter 7, one that I have. Let's see, where's my whiteboard say? My whiteboard says, they never sought to engage creatively with the aspirations of hundreds of millions of people emerging from the colonialism. Also in chapter 7. Topic 3, the key interventions that they had. Now, let's look at some of the key main ideas for the Dulles brothers and how they orchestrated it. These examples show that their ambitions and their actions and just everything, their goals that they wanted to make, right? And so in 1953 in Iran, the brothers Alan and John, they put a pivotal role in the CIA's first really major coup that they had. One of their missions, they overthrew Iran's prime minister at the time, which was Mohammed Mohseni Degh. That's how you spell it. I've had a tough time pronouncing it. But he nationalized British oil, and that was their fear, right? The brothers feared that this would push Iran closer to the Soviet Union during this time. And so the coup that the CIA placed threw him over, and the U.S. had ruled their iron fist, and decades later, it backfired. All this hit, and it led to the Iranian Evolution in 1979, which led to the rise of the American sentiment. And a quote that I had written from this on my whiteboard says that they saw the Mossadegh as I have a tough time presenting that name, as a menace not only of their clients but to the stability of the world. You can find that in chapter 4. Another part of this, Guatemala, 1954. In Guatemala, in 1954, the Dulles brothers had to lead another coup that to oust the president Jacobo Arnaz. And Jacobo Arnaz had implemented many types of reforms throughout the country, and this had threatened a lot of U.S. interests that we had in Guatemala at the time, because we were very interested in Panama, Guatemala, Argentina, all those countries south of Mexico, in between South America and Mexico. So But the intervention that they had, it destabilized Guatemala as like in a country, and it left like violence and like there's a lot of instability for America and Central America, and so we kind of just like got out of there. But they did take a lot of pride at it, or like a pride in it at first. You know, one quote I have from chapter 5 is the Guatemalan coup Guatemalan coup was Alan Dole's finest hour, or so it seemed at the time. And as you reflect later in chapter 5, you know, he kind of realizes that it wasn't as good as he thought it was. And then to go into our next one a couple years later, in Cuba in 1961, with the Bay of Pigs invasion that all of us have learned about, Alan Dole's most infamous failure, right? This was one of the biggest problems. The CIA had trained the Cuban exiles to invade Cuba. Like, we were training people to go in there and overthrow Castro. But it failed, like, did not work. It was embarrassing, quite honestly, for the U.S., and it made Castro's regime stronger. And this was a huge turning point for the Dulles brothers, and it led to, they brought it up to the president, and the president kind of, like, dismissed it, ignored it. So imagine what had happened if, you know, the president didn't dismiss it. In chapter 10, there's a quote that says, "How could I feel so stupid?" And it was Kennedy reflecting on Kennedy reflecting on his frustrations with like the whole process and operation that the Dulles brothers had. Topic 4, one of the consequences that they had for their actions. One of the most interesting parts that I really thought of this book, it discusses like the long-term effects the Dulles brothers had with their interventions, their coups, the way how they handled things. Even though they saw their actions as kind of like necessary to protect freedom, there was a lot of blowbacks and drawbacks from this. In Iran, you know, you had the coup in the 1970s. In Central America, you had the dictatorships that weren't overthrown. But look at Vietnam. We should shift over to there. Their aggressive stance on Vietnam led to the cost of millions of lives, and that was one of like the worst failures we've seen as a nation, even still to this day. And these outcomes raise some of the most important questions about the limits we have as American power and the unintended consequences of intervention. A quote from this would be chapter 9 that I found. It says, "They had a blowback. Their lack of foresight led them to be pure reckless adventures that they had abandoned American security." So this was like huge, or this was huge because the Dulles brothers were slipping, they were failing, but their sole mission and goal was to protect American freedom from communism. So big thing as we were shifting from chapters 9, 10, and 11. My last topic I really want to talk about today, why the story matters, right? Why is this story that I was assigned, why should it matter to all of us that we talk about in class? Well, to me, the book just isn't about history. It's about understanding the things that shape us from the past and what we can learn from today. Look at like how the Dulles brothers, and they reflect on their era. The U.S. saw itself as like a moral leader. We still think of the U.S. as a moral leader today. We believe our belief should be everywhere. And their belief in American exceptionalism is the reason their resilience of covert actions, the ideas they had, the U.S. foreign policies they put in, is where we are today. Stephen Kinzer argues throughout the book that the Dulles brothers were not just individuals, they were symbols for America, which I kind of agree on that. I liked that idea. And by studying this book and their legacy, we can understand the challenges and opportunities that not only we have as Americans to keep our country at a global superpower and one of the best, but just to see like what they did for it to happen and change, which is really interesting. So in conclusion, the Dulles brothers in this book taught us that not much, but like many and much and like all different types of individuals, right? They can shape history no matter what. And you got to think the Cold War being shaped by two brothers that were able to do this is very fascinating, and I'm really glad that I was chosen this book because it was really cool and neat to see one of my favorite topics in the Cold War and to kind of like see a different take on it. I've never heard of the Dulles brothers before until I read this book. But to learn they were incredibly powerful, the view they had on the world and the intervention that was left in this book, it made me think about America's role in the world just in general, and the balance of power that we have, the responsibility that we need to have along with it. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys were able to learn something from this. I'm kind of sick, so I hope you're able to understand me rambling a little bit with what I said. And if you're interested in the Cold War of this book, feel free to ask me like any more questions you might have down in like the little discussion comment section. I'll be more than glad to answer it. And if you guys want something to just read in general, I highly recommend reading this book because you're going to learn something about the Cold War you'll never thought of, and it's actually really cool and fascinating to learn. So thank y'all. Y'all have a good day. Happy end of the semester, guys.